there's going to be a big part of that industry that's going to be big influenced or replaced by generative AI, because generative AI tools are getting so good that we'll have a huge influx of generative music, and that's very well listenable. Probably in the near future, you won't be able to hear the difference. But then there's much more to it in being a musician, right?
Welcome to a new episode of XR and AI Spotlight, the show that gives the stage to the founders and makers pushing the boundaries of XR and AI. My name is Gabriele Romagnoli, I'm your host, and I'm here today with Max Tiel. Max is one of the co-founders of Thunderboom Records, a dance studio committed to empowering musicians, professionals, and organizations in the music industry that, like many other creative fields, have been shaken up by generative AI. Max is on the ground and works actively to create, test, and share how technology such as artificial intelligence, AR, and virtual avatars can empower emerging artists. They have developed a comprehensive open source toolkit to help musicians understand and implement these technologies in their own creative workflow. So today, we will discuss why they created an open source toolkit for musicians.
They have all kinds of AR implementations at Coachella, at the big American festival. We saw like, hey, how can Dutch artists also make use of this technology? So what are low-key tools that artists can use, right? And what are the benefits and what are the risks? Because there are quite often risks involved for upcoming artists. We have built our own AR tool for artists to use. It's fully open source. We don't collect any data, so there's no need to collaborate with a big tech firm that might use your data later.
The creative opportunities that avatars unlock for on-stage performances.
You can create your own avatar, so you can build yourself in all kinds of different ways with all different appearances, different bodies, and it can track your motions real time via your webcam or via an external camera. Last month we did a test with a Dutch artist named Jan Modaal. He started his performance behind the screen. He was projected as an avatar on the screen, and slowly he started breaking through the screen, and you could see the real him. So he actually performed with his own avatar.
How the AI beat maker can become the best companion for any DJ.
It's really a beat maker. You can use everything as input materials, also your own sounds that you have locally in, and it will always chop it up into hi-hats, into kicks, into claps. So it will always make more rhythmic samples out of it. In the past, where we gave these tools to DJs and said like, hey, there are different workflows that you can use. Either you create live beats with it, or you use it up front in your beat creation process, or some artists just loaded a whole list of samples that they then mixed in live.
And what step musicians can take to be ready for a future where technology and music are more interconnected than ever.
It is very important to gain some knowledge on the influence of new technology on your life as a creator, because whatever happens, that influence will be there at some point. And also, you cannot put the devil back in the box, right?
But before we get into it, I wanted to thank our sponsor Meshi, who made this episode possible. Meshi is a real powerhouse for generating 3D assets with AI. You can start with a simple text or image prompt and get high-quality stylized 3D models in just a minute. One feature I personally love is the ability to create stylized texture for any mesh, with or without UV. And since the release, Meshi's teams keep pushing amazing updates like texture inpainting, ultra-realistic sculpture, and the ability to rig and animate your character. To try it out, go to meshi.ai and start the 7 days trial to access all these incredible features. And now it's time to roll the title and welcome Max under the spotlight. Max, it is a real pleasure to have you here.
Likewise, thanks.
So if I am an artist, right, and maybe I'm not, let's say, famous, what would be my incentives to start investing in technology for my kind of performances? For example, a financial benefit or maybe even a creative benefit. What have you seen people, and especially musicians, in your network do?
Yeah. I think both are very valid, right? Creative and financial. I honestly believe that a lot of technological progression is there anyways. It's coming, right? So AI has been invented at some point, and it will progress until it has a really big influence. So I really view this as a process that cannot really be stopped, right? So it's something that you need to take into account and need to be creative with, because it will impact your life as an artist at some point. So that doesn't necessarily mean that you need to work with it, right? So if you are, for example, a singer-songwriter that creates music with vocals and the guitar, please keep on doing that, because that is very important and it's a way of expressing yourself. But I do think even for that artist, it is very important to gain some knowledge on the influence of new technology on your life as a creator, because whatever happens, that influence will be there at some point. And also, you cannot put the devil back in the box, right? You cannot say like, "Hey, generative AI, it it it, it won't be an impact anymore at some point," or I will just ignore it, because it will not ignore you, to say it like that. So I really think that it's important to have some basic knowledge of what new technology, in a broader sense of the word, can have as an impact on you as a creator.
What are the ways that these emerging artists can, for example, use 3D during their performances? Let's look, for example, at augmented reality.
Yeah. There are a lot of the AR tools out there that artists can use, right? But quite often they involve a lot of knowledge and a lot of money. And you need to collaborate with big tech companies such as Snapchat. So in Snapchat, it's quite easy to, for instance, create a filter, right? A filter on your head. But as an artist, it's quite hard to really set a scene for your own work, right? A scene that you can, for instance, use in your live performance. So we have built our own AR tool for artists to use. It's fully open source. We don't collect any data, so there's no need to collaborate with a big tech firm that might use your data later. An artist can use this tool to easily build an AR experience themselves that they can then use during their live performance. Or, for instance, they can use it also to sell merch, or to give people a little warming for marketing purposes. The core is that artists can build AR themselves, and that we only have the possibilities that we think are important for artists, right? Because in other technology, you have like a zillion options to build AR. We keep it very simple so that it's easy to use. And that's why you should relate to it at least, and not per se need to work with it.
Maybe this sounds a bit extreme, but there are those artists that completely embrace this and they just create a brand new way of expressing themselves just using technology, for example. And then there is another one that instead it's like, no, this is not for me. I'm a musician. I live and breathe with the audience, with the people that are at the show. This is what I do. I don't care about it. Is that the case? Is that how people are perceiving technology, or there is some middle ground? How have you seen actually people reacting when you present them the opportunities that technology has to offer?
Well, the last thing you mentioned, we hear really often, like, hey, I just create music, right? That's my expression, and I just want to be in touch with the audience. Once again, I to those people, I will say like, hey, it will become a bigger impact. So we always try to see like, hey, if we take that as the starting point, right? The human as a creator and the human interaction with the audience. So how can we strengthen that with the technology? So how can we make sure that if this technology gets a bigger impact, for instance, generative AI, that it happens in a way that it at least strengthens you as a human creator, and also that it happens in a way that it doesn't harm you too much, right? Because even if you are a creator like that, how will your music get to the people, right? There will be some kind of distribution of your recorded music. There's always AI involved in that. Please have some basic knowledge in how that happens, and where does the money go, right? Where do the royalties go? These kind of questions. But then also on stage, right? If you see like, hey, AR is implemented on Coachella with a big artist, gets a lot of interaction with the audience by there's a lot of money with that. It still does the human performance, but has this as an extra. That artist clearly has a benefit over a lot of upcoming artists that don't have the money or the means to do so. So how can we make sure that we level the playing field, make that technology more accessible, so that we can also help those artists that say like, hey, I don't want anything to do with it, right? Because they will get the negative impact if other artists work with it and they're the only ones not doing it. So, yeah.
So To go back, because you keep mentioning this example about augmented reality, right? And I think it does make sense, because I've seen also nowadays people, I mean, of course, everybody is also with their phone during a concert. We can discuss that's a positive thing or a negative thing. Can you explain us a little bit what is included in this toolkit, for example, when it comes to augmented reality? So if I am someone with close to non 3D experience, let's say, how can I start using this toolkit? What are the steps required in order to have, for example, at a show, an augmented reality element be implemented in?
Well, let's say that you have zero knowledge, right? Because we are talking from the perspective of a music creator, not a visual expert. There's literally a 2-minute tutorial that goes over all the features that we have. You can dive into the tool. It's literally you create an account. We only store obviously the username and the password, because otherwise you cannot log in. And then you can go ahead and start creating your own in a 3D space. So it's just an avatar in an empty room, and you can add building blocks in yourself. You can animate them, they can move around. You can also create a box so that you can relate your AR experience to the room that you are in or that you are playing in. There's always a QR code attached. You can print that QR code, you can put it on your projections, and that will enter the AR. And there's no need to download an app as a user when you're in the audience, because that is always a big step to take, right? You can just jump in, and that's what we do with all our tools in the toolkit. So this is very specifically on the AR tool, but we also develop generative AI tools, and we have an avatar tool, all kinds of different things, right? The basis that you want to make it as easy as possible. So.
Indeed, I want to know about it. You need to rely on some 3D assets, and sometimes they can be static, they could be animated. I imagine, I'm not sure, are there, for example, video supported or images? I imagine that those also no. Okay, so no video, but
no video, and so we have very clear boundaries, right? That is the thing, because we make it easier. It is limited, obviously, and I think for a lot of artists that is a good thing, because they are creative anyways. They can work around it, and at least it's a tool that you can understand, right? Because a video brings so much more difficulties, and also watching a video in AR is not always the most fun thing to do, right?
But then how that 3D objects or elements, you mentioned something about animated, how have you helped, for example, musicians and other artists to get them in it? Is that something like there are databases that you would recommend, or something to help create something that is customized or somehow resonate with what is their show or story that they want to tell?
Yeah, so we always try to make sure that you can use it, like, so you can place your own objects, pictures, you name it. You can just your own stuff you can put in there, but you can also add in stock objects, for instance, right, to make it compatible with marketplaces. So again, to make it more easy to use, right? So that is always an important factor to see, like, hey, what do you need if you are not an expert in, I don't know, 3D software or Photoshop, or once again, you are a music creator. So you need to, with very limited means, you need to be able to create.
And there is another point. I mean, right now there are a lot of these libraries that are available. For example, I mean, let's say Sketchfab being one. Another one that sometimes people don't know about is poly.pizza. It has it's a bit strange name, but trust me, there are a lot of low poly assets that are absolutely incredible. And then, of course, there is the whole other world where, for example, generative AI can also help you create 3D models, right? So then we're talking about tools like Meshi or CSM. There are also other generative AI tools that helps you to rig and skin those models, and maybe type something like jumping jack, and there you would see the model starts animating again. So there are so many variants also of this that then can allow you to generate that simple assets, and then using this open source toolkit you can get in the scene straight away. So I think that when we are talking about AI, how can technology and potentially now AI help musicians, is also like, for example, creating those digital assets that can be part of that augmented reality experience, for example.
Yeah.
You mentioned about also avatars, right? That is another way, of course, of enhancing this experience. And by the way, now we're talking about performances, but again, it doesn't need to be, right? It could be part of some digital assets that they use. It could be some promotional material, right? At that point, the scope is much broader. So how is the toolkit helping when it comes to avatars, and how have you seen those avatars representation being used by artists?
Yeah. So once again, we have looked at the big artists, right, and the possibilities that are out there. For instance, the Gorillas or Hatsune Miku or Lil Michaela. So virtual artists, for instance, that are popular. Eventually, we created our own avatar tool also together with Replica, the Rotterdam-based firm. And in this tool, you can upload 3D scans of yourself, which are also very easy to create. We also have workflows for that written out. And you can create your own avatar, so you can build yourself in all kinds of different ways with all different appearances, different bodies. And it can track your motions real time via your webcam or via an external camera, the motions of your face, of your body. So you can project yourself as an avatar on the screen. And for all tools, we always do live tests, right? You can only test it if it's technology for live use, you can only test it in the context of a live performance. So last month we did a test with a Dutch artist named Jan Modaal, and his idea was that he wanted to blend in the digital and the physical. So he started his performance behind the screen, a projection screen, and he was projected as an avatar on the screen. And slowly he started breaking through the screen, and you could see the real him, right? So he actually performed with his own avatar. He built the avatars himself in our avatar tool. So we had different versions. The audience could choose a player every time. So we had 6 different players with tracks that were connected to the players, and that way you had really nice interaction with the audience also.
Very nice. So how does that tool works? Do you need to take a picture of yourself? How do you make it that the avatar or the 3D model is actually responding and mimicking the musician's motion or facial expression?
Yeah. So well, you start with making a 3D scan of your own face. That is actually the starting point. And there's loads of tools that you can use. One well-known one is Polycam. I'm not saying that is the one with the best terms of use, right? But it's just one that pops up into my head right now. You make a 3D scan of your face, you can upload that into the avatar system, and then you can use that as the basic building block of creating your own avatar. So it will look like you, but you can change everything, right? The hair, the ears, the nose, the mouth, a beard, the body type. You can choose all kinds of body types, male, female, everything in between. There's sliders that you can use, right, if you want to be very specific. So it's really easy to use, and you can either make an avatar that really looks like you, or you can go like fully crazy and make some kind of alien representation of yourself. You can also just start with an avatar that's already in the system and start customizing that. So you don't necessarily need to start with your own face. Yeah.
So this is another interesting thing, and you mentioned that live performance aspect. Have people also use this in other ways?
For sure. We had an artist that always, it's called Smitty. It's a rapper, and in his music he always has conversations with himself. So his younger self, his older self. So we created different versions of him, younger versions, older versions, and used that in the projections, so that he could really have a conversation with himself as an old man or as a young person still. So we really try to focus on that storytelling element also, but we always start with the artistic sort of challenge, right? So what is the message that you want to share, or what is it that you want to do with the audience, or maybe you want to have a better interaction, or maybe you want to do something specific with a specific song, right? And then we start looking how the technology can help them. So that's always also the case with this avatar system.
I wanted to have a quick break to remind you that if you like this conversation, you should check all past episodes at xraispotlight.com. Also, If you don't want to miss anything, remember to subscribe to the XR AI Spotlight newsletter, and you will immediately get an updated list with over 200 mixed reality apps you can filter from various fields, weekly in-depth interviews, and one product spotlight personally tested by me right in your mailbox every week. And now, let's get back to the show.
And actually you made a very good point, and that's justify also why it is so important to start understanding this before making a judgment, right? Because also when you see how other people have used it and you have been open-minded, then you realize how technology can help you in many, many different ways. That is not just, oh, I'm not a musician anymore. I think being a musician, being an artist means more. There is much more than playing just music, and it's about the story you tell. I think that is also an important thing. And there are many different ways, without judging who want to stick with the full traditional again, right? Again, we are not judging, nobody's judging here, but it's just a matter of understanding so that you can make an informed decision whether this is for you or not. One more question, and we're gonna go, I do have many more, but let's get into generative AI, right? And because that is something that is worrying and exciting people at the same time. So when it comes to your toolkit, how have you used generative AI tools in it, and how have artists taken advantage of it? Can you give us some example?
Yeah, sure. So with generative AI, we quite often look at challenges, right, in terms of bias in data sets, or representation, equal representation, or where does the data come from that's being used to train the algorithm. One example that we have is Wave, and it's a series of generative AI plugins that we create based on heritage materials. So we take public data sets that are not protected, so they're already everybody's ownership, and we use that to train our algorithm. So you can, with our tools, tell stories with heritage materials. You don't violate anybody's rights, and you can use these materials to create new beats, create new visuals, and bring these heritage materials to the dance floor. A specific example, for instance, we did a party at ADE 2 years ago where an Amsterdam-based artist would play with samples from Amsterdam, from the city of Amsterdam, use those samples with the Wave system to create new beats that were mixed in his regular live set. So he could tell stories of these original Amsterdam samples. So yeah, that is one very clear example, I think.
So when we mention about this Wave system that you described, right? So how does it look like? What can artists do with it?
Yep. So actually, we're now working on the second version. The first version is available as a custom digital audio workstation via wave.studio. That's the URL. But now we are turning it into a series of plugins, VSTs, so that you can use it in any audio workstation, for instance, Ableton. So it's just a few plugins that you download. One is a sample generator. The other one is a sequencer that you can then populate with the samples that you create. And we also have an attached plugin for visuals. And how that works is the titles of the input material. So for instance, if we talk about the city sounds of Amsterdam, there's the sound of a tram rolling by. Our sampler can turn that into a kick, a hi-hat, a clap, something like that, based on frequency level. So a low part of this audio fragment will be a kick, a higher part will be a hi-hat. You can then put that all in the sequencer to create a beat with it. And the original title, so it's a tram rolling by, will then relate to the visuals. So the visual system will, that algorithm will start looking for visuals with a tram in it, or something that is related to it. Because if there are no visuals with a tram, you might get cars rolling by or something that looks like it. So you can use that as an extra element in your storytelling as an artist.
Okay, so very interesting. So in this case, what you're saying is that you do not text or prompt for a specific sound. You can kind of like feed these sounds into the system, and then based on the learning of this model, it generates new sounds. along with images. Have I understood correctly?
Yeah, it makes beats from sounds, actually, from sound archives.
Okay. So then the other question is, so who owns that? Because that is always the other point, right? If, for example, let's say, uh, can those be used part of a track that becomes commercially available? What are the implications of it?
Yeah, so the input material is fully public, right? So it can be used in any way you want. That's the nice thing of it, right? So with a lot of other generative algorithms, either you license everything that you create with it back to the company, or you use copyright protected materials. That's not the case here, right? Because this data set is already fully public, so it is already under a Creative Commons license. So that's why we use these materials. We know it will never be as smooth as, I don't know, a pseudo or Udio. It's a different way of working, right? It's an alternative, and because of that, it is fine that it sounds a little bit different, or maybe it's a little bit more edgy. At least you can use it in a safe way.
So, and how have you seen? Can you give us some example of what musicians have created with this kind of models? How have they used them during performances, or maybe in their own commercial work, or as part of the creative process? Really curious, actually.
Yeah, I think the latter is the most important, right? To see how can it be more creative, because I'm not sure if this is a tool that will really have the commercial value, right? Because it is more part of your creation process as a storytelling tool. But so we've done live shows in the past where we gave these tools to DJs and said like, hey, you can use it in any way it helps you, right? So there are different workflows that you can use. Either you create live beats with it, or you use it upfront in your beat creation process, or some artists just loaded a whole list of samples that they then mixed in live, these type of things. And we're doing that now as well. We're doing a small tour through Europe because we are now collaborating with archives in the United Kingdom, Spain, and the Baltics as well. So that you can use samples from these countries. Once again, we give these tools to artists and say like, hey, you are in the lead. It's your creative process. We only want to see how can these tools help you create a story. Yeah. And based on that, we also make changes again, right? Based on their feedback.
So, and have you seen maybe some type of music that let's say are easier or more prone, or other, where these kind of tools can be used more easily? I don't know.
Yeah.
Is that like, you mentioned rap, you mentioned something like DJs. Can you tell us?
Yeah. So we try to do tests with all kinds of genres, but I do think that electronic music, that DJs are often quite open to it because their workflow is already quite digital often. Of course, you have DJs that just use vinyl, but a lot of DJs and producers, they already create music on their computer. They use technology when they are live on stage. So they are open to these new innovations, but it's not solely them, right? Also singers, for instance, if you talk about synthetic vocals technology or voice cloning, these kind of things, a lot of singers are also interested in that. But I do think that for DJs, it is a little bit easier to have technology in your working process, right? To have these small parts of your creative process and experiment in that with for instance generative AI. Yeah.
And I'm still curious also, is there difference? I don't know how does Wave Studio perform or behaves when it's about different kind of sounds that are generated, because one thing is music, one thing is vocals, one thing is sound effect. How does your model behave in these different type of sounds?
So we always create the way it's currently set up. It's really a beat maker. So we always you can use everything as input materials, also your own sounds that you have locally. I don't know, if you have a sample of your own vocal, you can load that in, and it will always chop it up into hi-hats, into kicks, into claps, these kind of things, right? So it will always make more rhythmic samples out of it. We also in the DAW that is browser based, you can also create bass patterns, for instance, and lead patterns. But for these VSTs, we've only focused on beats because that just works very well. Because indeed, like you say, the length of the sample, it is hard to work with if you want to create a bass, right? It's always going to be a small part that you can use. So yeah, it is complex indeed.
So the one of the question I also have is like, what's your take about generative AI as a whole in the music industry? Is that having a serious impact right now, or is that something that we haven't seen yet?
Well, I think the last is for sure true, right? The real impact still has to come, because I do think that it will have a much bigger impact. I think in the future there's going to be well, let me start by saying it doesn't matter, right? It's going to be here anyways, like I said before. So whether I think it's good or not, it's going to be here. It is already here. It's going to be bigger, but I do think there's going to be a difference between live music and recorded music, right? Because the generative AI tools are getting so good that we will have a huge influx of generative music, and that's very well listenable. It is really easy to create, right? And probably in the near future, you won't be able to hear the difference. But then there's much more to it in being a musician, right? You have your live performance, which is very clearly you as an artist. It is also about the cultus of you as a creator. It is about the story that you want to tell, about a specific sound. I always like the fact that an artist is a person. It's not just the music, but there's the whole cultus of the artist around it. So I think that will remain very clearly, and the live music will remain very human with that, right? Because that is all about the artist. But I do think that on streaming platforms, we are all going to listen to a whole lot of AI generated music that can also touch us. I'm totally sure.
Without knowing, because that's also what's going to happen. That you will listen to that and just do not really realize. And also, I don't think it's all about being fully generated, but where portion of it might be fully generated, right? So
For sure.
again, right? It's if we have a choir in the background, hey, maybe I'm gonna make the choir in the background use with AI, right? Because it's more convenient, it's faster. But then there is another aspect of it that I realized that indeed it's very important, and especially for the emerging artists, part of a lot of, I think, maybe you can tell me if I'm wrong, but a lot of the profit and in general also the energy that artists get is from being there live in person with the audience, right? And that's also how the value of their music is so tied to their person, their let's say image that they portray outside.
Yeah.
But what about, for example, those musicians that create music and create sound, but then more commercially, right? So let's say I create a jingle, or I create some other tunes or sounds or soundtracks and so on. Should they be then more worried than what are live artists?
I think so. Yeah, I think that generative AI will impact their work more than live forms. I honestly think so. And it doesn't necessarily mean that they're out of work in a short period of time, right? Or that companies don't want to hire people anymore. But I do think that there's going to be a big part of that industry that's going to be being influenced or replaced by generative AI. Maybe even by the fact that there's less room for creators, because the creators that are out there can easily upskill their production, right, with generative AI. So let's say if there are now 500 commercials and there's room for 500 different creators in a given period of time, in the future all that work might be done by 200 creators, because they can work twice as fast, right? So in whatever way, I'm quite sure that process will be heavily influenced in the near future. Yeah.
What advice would you give to them? But there is also another point that I've been thinking about after interviewing some other folks here at the show, and that is also that before you're saying that there were 1,000 commercials to be made, but I wonder if we will also move into a place where a commercial will cost less. So instead of maybe 1,000, there might be 1,500, because people that wouldn't have the budget to actually make it, then he says, okay, well, we can actually now, this commercial got cheaper. So let's make maybe 1,500, or let's make one, because now we can afford it, because let's say there could be someone with using generative AI to create it, instead of just thinking that there will be less jobs available. But it's more like there are more opportunities, but also the dynamic is going to be different. Does that make sense?
I mean, for sure, it all makes sense, right? But it's all a bit looking into the future. I'm totally sure that we will have personalized ads as well in the near future, right? So everybody will hear a version that's tailored to their likes. So there might be one main composer or one main author, and it will be tailored for everybody who needs to hear it. So I think all these things can very well be true and might already happen here and there. So, but I think there's even much more to it that we cannot think of right now.
If you are thinking about this, if you're listening to this, you're making already a step in the right direction, trying to understand how technology can help you. And of course, the toolkit that Thunderboom Records has put together is a great start for you. You will find it down in the description, and this includes, of course, how to help you make AR experiences, 3D avatars, or maybe generate beats from various samples. One. The other question, last question I have, what advice would you give to instead maybe general musicians who are approaching and trying to understand this? Maybe if they are also outside of the live performance, what advice would you give them?
I would always advise people to at least have a look at what new technology can bring you, or what the risks are, right? At least I actually started with that. Relate yourself to this information, to this technology. Don't necessarily use it if you don't want to, but at least know what it can do and what the potential risks are. I think that's very important.
Awesome. Max, then thank you very much for being here with us at the show.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for listening in. If you like the show, please leave a rating on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or a thumbs up on YouTube. It really means a lot to me, and it's a great support for the show. Till next time.